Christmas Eve, 1945. Fayetteville, West Virginia. While the rest of America was celebrating the end of a long and brutal war, the Sodder family was preparing for a quiet Christmas. Their house stood at the edge of town, nestled in the Appalachian foothills, a modest but proud home, built through years of hard work. George Sodder was an Italian immigrant who had built a successful trucking business. He was outspoken, especially about his hatred of Mussolini and fascism, an attitude that didn't sit well with some in the local Italian-American community. Jenny, his wife, was devoted to her family. Together, they had 10 children. That night, 5 of them were still awake, playing with new toys and waiting excitedly for Santa. At 1 a.m., everything changed. A strange phone call woke Jenny. A woman's voice, someone she didn't know, asked for a name she didn't recognize. There was laughter in the background, glass clinking. Jenny told her she had the wrong number and hung up. Then she noticed something else. The lights were still on downstairs, the curtains were open, and the front door was unlocked, unusual for their routine. She turned everything off and went back to bed. A few minutes later, the house was on fire. George, Jenny, and 4 of their children managed to escape. But 5 of their kids, Maurice, 14, Martha, 12, Louis, 9, Jenny, 8, and Betty, 5, were trapped inside, presumably still asleep in their upstairs bedroom. George smashed a window to re-enter, slicing open his arm. But the interior staircase had already collapsed into flames. He ran to get his ladder, it was gone. He tried to drive his trucks up to the 2nd floor to climb in through the windows. Either truck would start. Just a day earlier, they had been working perfectly. By the time the fire department arrived, it was too late. The Sodder home was reduced to a heap of smoking ruins. But what followed next is what turned this tragedy into a mystery. No remains were found. Not a single bone. Not one tooth. Experts were baffled. Even in house fires, especially those that burned for only 45 minutes, as this one had, some human remains are always found. And the Sodders searched the ashes themselves, sifting through debris with their bare hands. Still, nothing. Authorities quickly ruled it an accident. Faulty wiring, they said. But George had recently had the house rewired. The electrician had confirmed everything was in order. Besides, the Christmas lights had still been on during the early part of the fire. How could faulty wiring explain that? Jenny began to conduct her own research. She burned animal bones in the stove and in an open fire to test whether they would be reduced to ash. They never were. She consulted crematorium workers, who told her that even at extremely high temperatures, bone fragments remain. Then came the sightings. A woman claimed to have seen the children peering out from a car as it drove away from the burning house. Another said she served them breakfast the next morning in a roadside diner. A third saw them in a hotel room weeks later, accompanied by 2 unfamiliar adults. A letter arrived from a woman in Charleston, who claimed the children were being held in a foreign convent. A soldier passing through town said he saw a billboard with the children's faces and realized he'd seen them in another state. None of these leads were confirmed, but each added fuel to a growing theory: the children hadn't died. They had been taken. But by whom? And why? George and Jenny never stopped searching. They hired private investigators, distributed flyers, contacted the FBI. At one point, they even traveled across the country following a lead about one of their sons. Nothing ever panned out. Then, in 1967, more than 20 years after the fire, a letter arrived. No return address. Inside was a photograph of a young man in his 20s. On the back, a strange message. Louis Sodder. I love brother Frankie. Illo boys. A 90132 or 35. The young man looked strikingly like Louis, one of the missing Sodder children. George believed it was his son. He sent a private investigator to track the source of the letter. The investigator vanished. They never heard from him again. Over time, theories multiplied. Some believed the children had been kidnapped by someone connected to the local Italian mafia. George's outspoken political beliefs may have made him a target. Others believed the children had been taken in a revenge plot, or even sold into adoption. Some went further. Was the fire a cover-up? Were corrupt local officials involved? Why had the fire department waited so long to respond, nearly 7 hours? Why had the family's phone line been cut just before the blaze? And what happened to the man who had warned George weeks earlier that his home would go up in smoke? The billboard stayed up for nearly 4 decades, with the children's faces watching every passerby on Route 16. It became a haunting landmark, a symbol of a mystery that refused to be buried. Jenny wore black every day until her death in 1989. George died in 1969, still convinced his children were alive. The remaining Sodder siblings continued to seek answers, but the trail had long gone cold. And so the question endures. Did 5 children die in a fire that left no trace? Or were they stolen, hidden, and silenced? A tragic accident, or a carefully planned disappearance? The truth lies somewhere in the smoke of that December night. A truth that has eluded investigators, the public, and even the Sodder family for nearly 80 years. Some stories are sad. Some are strange. But this one is different. Because it feels like someone, wanted this mystery to remain unsolved. And perhaps, it always will. This was Noctalia Stories. If this tale sent chills down your spine, hit like. Share your theory in the comments. And most importantly, subscribe. Because the night is long. And we have many more stories to tell.